His name is often spelled that way, though sometimes you will see a Y after the O and before the E, Dostoevsky. Those are different transliterations of the Russian characters. For those of us, like him and like me actually, whose names were originally written in Cyrillic, it can be awkward to translate them into Roman characters. In any case, Dostoevsky is one of the greatest novelists in history. He looks like that. He was from a generation of great Russian novelists, including Tolstoy and Turgenev, a variety of others. So there is a huge literature in 19th century Russia of tremendously gifted novelists who are trading on similar themes and exploring similar ideas. We're going to look at him as a good example, and in particular we'll be looking at one chapter of the brothers Karamazov, namely the Grand Inquisitor chapter, which tells a very dramatic story and stands on its own as a short story very nicely, without having to know what's going on in the rest of that epic novel. These guys do tend to write very long novels, very involved novels that have a lot of soap opera elements, but also a lot of philosophical elements. And so we're going to be focusing on the most philosophical and maybe the least soap opera-ish of his works and of the works of the Russian novelists in general. Dostoevsky lived from 1821 to 1881. He is among the greatest novelists of every language. Friedrich Nietzsche rated reading Dostoevsky among the most beautiful strokes of fortune in his life. Dostoevsky is a writer who I think manages to be incredibly deep as well as compelling. He knows how to tell a great story, to develop wonderful characters, but also to explore deep philosophical themes in ways that often go far beyond philosophical thought, where one feels that one has to articulate things very explicitly and directly. He's able to use the contrast between various characters to explore the real consequences of holding a certain view of the world and of yourself. And so that allows his novels to have a philosophical dimension that in many ways is deeper than most works of philosophy. Dostoevsky himself had a really interesting life. His works were banned in Russia after the Communist Revolution, although he was considered a great figure at his time. He started off as a young man being a socialist and being part of a politically disapproved group. He was captured as part of this band and imprisoned. And in a very dramatic incident, was about to be executed, was led out to a field to be shot. They had kneeled down and put the gun to the back of his head when suddenly someone ran up with a letter that actually commuted his sentence to imprisonment. So he spent years in prison after that, enduring great hardships, having nothing really but a copy of the New Testament with him in order to sort of pass the time. He became physically very ill in prison and was finally released in part because of his illness. It is thought that, by the way, that almost execution was staged. This is a way that the Tsar had of terrifying prisoners. Basically take them out and tell them they were going to be executed, and at the last minute have somebody rush up and say, it's been commuted on kindness of the Tsar. So it really wasn't an accident. This was planned from the beginning. But nevertheless, it was terrifying. People had no way of knowing this. And so the novels came out of a huge amount of personal suffering as well. Now, Dostoevsky did not remain a socialist. His views were transformed, and in fact, he became a conservative, which is part of the reason his works were banned after the Russian Revolution in the Soviet Union. How do you understand conservative? We face a problem here that we're going to face with a lot of political terms throughout this course. Conservative, liberal, progressive, fascist, communist. There are going to be a variety of terms that matter a lot to us throughout the history of the 20th century, but that really don't have any agreed upon meaning. And if you consult political philosophers, historians, and so on to try to get a clear meaning of these terms, often you can't do it. Now, for somebody like me I'm really a logician, and I look at these things and think, I want a clear definition of these terms, and when I evaluate things and a historian says, well, here are 9 things that are associated generally with fascism, I find that very unsatisfying. So I'm going to be trying to give you more precise definitions, ones that I think work in general, though they don't always reflect what everybody using that term means. Anyway, here's the first step of what a conservative is. A conservative is somebody who believes in ordered liberty. Both elements of this are important, the order as well as the liberty. So it's a liberty for people to follow their own conception of the good, to live their lives their own way. It is a liberty however, within a framework of order, within a framework governed by the rule of law, and also by the less formal structure of social institutions. Edmund Burke, an earlier conservative, called these little platoons, basically saying society is made up of a lot of little platoons. Some of them families, some of them voluntary associations, things like clubs, churches, universities, other kinds of institutions where people come together and band together for particular reasons. And so those things provide a kind of order to society, as well as law, formally providing a structure. And the idea is that the structure and the liberty are supposed to work together. The structure is supposed to enable people to exercise liberty. The liberty, however, is to be constrained by structure. And so John Locke expresses this at one point by saying the state of nature was a state of liberty, but not a state of license. And then liberty under government, he says, is partly to have settled rules to live by that allow you to do what you want as long as the law is silent. So it's the idea of a combination of order and liberty. Now that isn't exactly Dostoevsky's understanding, though I think it's very close. Dostoevsky's way of looking at this is to say, well, why is the order important? Why is the liberty important? The answer is because conservatism, in his view, is a philosophy of respect for human beings and their choices. That means also a respect for the past, a respect for the future as well. And that not only means preserving the best of the past in order to pass it along to the future, but also setting up a structure of order in such a way that the future is predictable. Why is it important that liberty be ordered according to this view? Well, it's because in order to act, we have to have some understanding of what the likely consequences of our action are. We have to know something about the effects they will have in the future. And that requires a certain predictability about human affairs. It requires a rule of laws, for example, as opposed to a rule of men. Why? Because who knows what the dictator or the king or the monarch will decide what to do in a given case. But if there are laws, then it should be prescribed. You should know what will happen in a given case, and the future should be predictable. So respect for the past means respect for tradition and authority to some degree, and respect for the future means respect for predictability, having a structure of order that allows you to predict the future, as well as an obligation, of course, to pass on what you've been given from the past to the future. Well, in any case, it also involves a respect for oneself. And one of the themes in Dostoevsky is that notion of respect. Respect for others, respect for oneself, respect for social institutions. That's something that becomes a key issue in the text that we're going to examine today. Now, one thing I do want to make clear is that Dostoevsky is not a conservative in a kind of resistant to change thing. Sometimes people say, conservative is hostile to change. That may or may not be true, according to those earlier definitions. Somebody who thinks they need to bring about a revolution, for example, to bring about a condition of order and liberty, is by no means someone who's opposed to change, but they're a conservative in that broader sense. Edmund Burke, for example, said the American Revolution was a conservative revolution. It was change, but change in order to reestablish a kind of structure of ordered liberty that had been lost. And so he's not at all, Dostoevsky that is, a conservative in the don't make changes sense. He attacks feudalism, he attacks many of the existing social institutions of Russia at the time. He tries to break down barriers between social classes. In short, he sees a lot in current structures that he finds objectionable and tries to undermine that. But nevertheless, he does that in order to free people to pursue their own conception of the good, not in order to force some conception of the good on them. And he sees that as the crucial distinction. Well, he also argues, in this section we're going to be concerned with in particular, but also more broadly, in favor of Christianity. And to some extent here there's a strong parallel with Nietzsche. Nietzsche is hostile to Christianity, but they're both in a way seeing the same point. They're seeing that up to the 19th century at any rate, in Western civilization, moral structures and the structure of the Christian religion were closely identified. That is to say, people's moral ideas and Christian ideas were bound up together in such a way that if Christianity starts receding, then moral structures are called into question too. And so Nietzsche, when he announces that God is dead, doesn't mean that literally, right? On a classical conception of God, Christian or not, God is a being that's eternal and necessary. God can't die. But what does Nietzsche mean when he says God is dead? Yeah?
People have sort of lost their way.
People have lost their way, exactly. People have lost faith. Religion is no longer the force that it was. And so he's really talking about a cultural collapse of religion, not the death of a supreme being. That's just his sort of, if you want, figurative way of talking about that. And Dostoevsky, in a sense, is seeing the same thing, too. He's seeing Christianity receding, and he realizes that something else is going to have to take its place, and that moral ideas are going to be unending. And in particular, what worries him is this. Christianity teaches something very important and very central from a moral point of view, he thinks, which is that everybody deserves respect as a child of God. Okay? In an earlier time, in ancient Greece, for example, or in Rome, there wasn't a similar idea. The Greeks considered everybody who was not Greek to be a barbarian. They just thought they babbled. In fact, the term babble and the term barbarian are etymologically related, because the Greek term for those who were not Greek was just baba. Those who just babbled like babies. Okay, just now, some people speak Greek and others just go ba 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 ba. But the idea, they're the civilized people in Greece and then the barbarians everywhere else. And the Romans, similarly, there was a great advantage to being a Roman citizen, and it was really that those who were not Roman citizens were less worthy, occupied a different space in the law and in moral treatments too. Well, Christianity basically suggests, no, there isn't a basic division like that. Every human being is a child of God, and so there's something divine. There is a human dignity in every single human being. And what worries Dostoevsky is that if Christianity starts to recede as a cultural force, then that idea can easily go along and be lost as well. And he senses that happening. He says basically, all right, give up Christianity. What then supports this idea that every human being deserves respect? Immanuel Kant, I mentioned in connection with the Enlightenment, is saying, dare to know is the motto of the Enlightenment. He's the great Enlightenment philosopher. He also basically has one moral principle he calls the categorical imperative, and in one of its forms it says you must respect everyone as an end in him or herself. You must not use people. Treat everyone as an end, not merely as a means. In other words, respect the dignity of every human being. But now, he's trying to give that a purely secular foundation. And Dostoevsky's worrying, is that even possible? Can we keep that notion of respect for every human being have a dignity, without some religious support for it? And in a way, his works are about that theme. Is it possible? What happens once that support that religion provided is withdrawn? Well, he does see Christianity as in decline and sees that as presenting a serious danger. What then is actually going to convince people that human beings have a dignity? If we don't have a dignity as children of God, then why can't we have a dignity at all? Why not just view us as animals? And, of course, you might be an animal rights person who says, but all animals have a dignity. But in 19th century Russia, that wasn't really a popular view. You don't find a lot of 19th century Russian vegans. And so we've got a sort of problem here, really. What are you going to do to support that idea of everybody deserving respect, everybody having dignity? Is there any longer any foundation? Now, well, there is the book, The Brothers Karamazov in Russian. That's what it looks like in Russian on the page. And here is the part that we're going to be talking about. Whoa, I should have lightened that image because that's sort of hard to read. But here's the idea in this chapter. It's really a story that one of the characters writes. And in the story, Jesus comes back to Earth during the most intense period of the Spanish Inquisition. Well, he arrives just as the Inquisitor has been going around torturing people, demanding to know their faith, forcing them to confess, and so forth. And the crowd immediately recognizes Jesus. He performs miracles. He cures a blind man. He raises a girl from the dead. And so, in Dostoevsky's version of the story here, we've got these images taken from the New Testament of there, Jesus curing the blind man, restoring his sight, and so on. Now, the Grand Inquisitor sees Jesus performing these miracles, and far from bowing down and worshiping him or whatever, he seizes him and imprisons him. He takes him to jail and says that he's going to be burned at the stake the very next day. He tells him, look, the crowds were cheering for you today, but hey, tomorrow they're going to be clamoring for you to be burned at the stake. They're going to be throwing logs in the fire. The mob is fickle, don't count on the people. And this is an amazing thing, right? I mean, why is the Grand Inquisitor doing this? This story has inspired all sorts of artworks like these. But the Grand Inquisitor then begins to explain. He starts asking Jesus questions, and he asks for explanations of certain things and explains his own actions. He says, look, You gave the people freedom. Freedom to believe or not to believe. And that has brought them nothing but torment. There's a problem that he's alluding to here, that philosophers tend to refer to as the problem of the hiddenness of God. Okay, that is to say, if God exists, why doesn't God come out and just announce it? Why in a classroom like this, where one's discussing the ideas of Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, one saying, yes, God exists, and we better believe it or we're in deep trouble, and Nietzsche saying, no, God is dead. Why doesn't God just come down and say, I am real? I mean, after all, suppose I hear you debating the question of whether Dan Bonamack is real, or just a figment of some people's imaginations, right? I might overhear this. I might come into the room and say, hey, here I am. I'm real, right? Actually, last night I happened to watch on television a Hitchcock movie from 1938, The Lady Vanishes. Okay, this woman who the main character has been talking to disappears suddenly, and she starts trying to find this woman, Mrs. Freud, I think it is, and everybody in the train starts telling, there was no such person here. She's a figment of your imagination, says this psychologist, and so forth. And, eventually Mrs. Freud does reappear. Not to spoil the whole movie for you, but a little bit of it. Anyway, she was a real person. And, you might think, why did God do that? Why does God remain hidden? Why didn't God just say, here I am? Now, what sort of answer could we give to that question? What would be the point of faith? Well, what would be the point of faith? That's one way of looking at it. Yes, God is leaving us free to believe or not to believe. And the Inquisitor says, look, God, why are you doing it? You could make everybody believe if you just appeared in such a strong way. Now, actually, this is a question debated by the rabbis in the Talmud at one point, when one of the rabbis is pressing this point, saying, I don't understand why God remains hidden. Why doesn't God come out and reveal himself? Why doesn't God just say to us all, yes, I exist? Another rabbi said, well, what would you have him do? So he said, well, what if, for example, as we discussed this, suddenly on the blackboard is written in large letters, I exist, signed, God. Okay? And now, the rabbi who is questioning this says, well, wait a minute. Do you think, would all of the rest of you rabbis agree that that proved the existence of God? And let me ask you, suppose suddenly, appearing on the chalkboard over there, as if by magic, I exist, signed, God. Would you all say, whoa, God is no longer hidden. God does exist, yes! And fall down on your knees. All right, some of you are saying no. Why, you pagans?
Because you could have staged it.
You would, that's right, you would think, this is staged, right? How do I know God really did that? How do I know that wasn't Bonamack's TA somehow behind there managing to do it? That I've given an invisibility cloak. Look, it's Keith Tarofsky, for example, that asked him to do it. How do I know that there isn't some weird thing, or even some demon, right, that is deceiving us? How do I know that this Bonamack guy isn't some kind of magician who's just making it happen through, I've seen Stranger Things in Las Vegas. And so, and that's without even going to a show. So, you could think, yeah, look, that's not enough to convince me. And so the rabbi says, well, yeah, okay, good, precisely. Now, what else can he do? Suppose God materializes. A guy, very tall guy, in a long, white flowing robe with a long beard, says, I am the Lord your God. Would that be enough? You could think, where'd Bonamack get that giant? How did he dress up like that, right? The rabbi said, yeah, gosh, even that's really not conclusive. And in short, the point of the discussion, though there's never really an agreement, is that maybe there's nothing that God could do that would make himself so manifest that everyone would realize, oh, that's definitive proof that God exists. So, in any case, you might say, it's not clear whether this problem is even one that can be overcome. But the Grand Inquisitor says, look, by the mere fact, Jesus, that you came and didn't compel people to believe, you allowed them the freedom to believe or not to believe. But actually, that's a difficult thing. It puts the burden, it puts the responsibility on the people. And the Grand Inquisitor says, look, they don't like that. Now, the Grand Inquisitor happens to be the head of the church in this area. And so he says, the church has been kinder to people, much kinder to people than you are. The church has taken that freedom away. It's a freedom that makes them feel uncomfortable and so we've assigned all authority to the Pope. The Pope can determine the Word of God, and that means that people can just follow what the Pope says. The Pope will answer all questions, and not even Jesus himself now has the power to change anything. Church took away freedom for the sake of happiness. And so now you can see why throwing Jesus in chains. Because the Grand Inquisitor is saying, you've come back to Earth and you're going to mess it all up. Now, what could Jesus do to mess it all up? Why is he worried? Yeah.
You can say what he's doing isn't really what God.
That's right. He can contradict the Grand Inquisitor. He can contradict the Pope. He can say, hey, the church has taken all this authority onto itself, but actually the church is wrong about some things. It could be that the church is wrong about some things. It could be that he just says, well, they don't have the authority. They happen to be right. But that's kind of like the guy in the front row saying, hey, the words on the blackboard, and he's right. That doesn't make him the grand authority, right? It's not as if we have to say, all truth resides in the pronouncements of him in the first row. And so, in short, Jesus could undermine that authority by contradicting it outright or by just denying the existence of the authority. And that's a danger. And so the Grand Inquisitor says, look, we've made the people happy. That you filled their minds with lots of questions, you put the responsibility on them. We've answered their questions and taken that responsibility away. And now you've come back to mess it up. Don't do it. Well, yeah, there are some nice little illustrations of a story that this should now be reminding you of Jesus in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. He goes off to meditate. And by the way, in many religious traditions, there is a similar kind of story of people going off for 40 days and 40 nights. In biblical times, that's a set of numbers that matter a lot. But even in other religious traditions, in Zen Buddhism, it is a common thing for people to go off into the forest for 40 days and 40 nights to meditate, to seek enlightenment, and so on. In any case, Jesus does this. And what happens while he's there in the wilderness? Exactly, he is tempted. Satan appears to him and offers him 3 temptations. And so the Grand Inquisitor now ends up actually paralleling those 3 temptations. What we've got here is a retelling of that story about Jesus in the desert. And so here is the first one of those. Satan appears and says, if you're the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. And Jesus answers, it is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Now, what is that little story about? What is the devil really offering? Material gratification. Yeah, Jesus is out in the desert, right? 40 days and 40 nights. It's not like the desert is filled with great dining establishments. And so by now, Jesus is very hungry. And so it's partly a purely selfish thing, a material satisfaction of that hunger. But more broadly, it's giving Jesus what he wants, right? He's craving bread. He's craving food. And the devil says, I'll give you what you want. And Jesus responds by saying, no, right? In fact, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to even use my own power to do it. Well, here's how the Grand Inquisitor puts it. He says, look, in the end, the people will lay their freedom at our feet and say to us, make us your slaves, but feed us. Now, the person telling the story here is Ivan. He's the author of this little story within the story. And Ivan says, look, this is what people want. People want to be fed. They want to be taken care of. They don't want freedom. They don't want decision-making authority. They don't want responsibility. People really just want to be taken care of. They want to be treated like children. Okay, when you're a child, you don't really normally face the problem of what you're going to eat, or of how to get food, or how to get by in the world. Your parents take care of you. Your parents feed you. They provide the food and clothing and the other things that you need in order to live. And Ivan's basically saying, actually, all people are like this. It's not just children. Everybody would like to be taken care of. Everybody would love to not have to decide for themselves how to live, figure out for themselves how to get food, how to get what they want. They'd like to be like happy children who are just given what they want. And that's what the church is giving them. The church is giving them what they truly want. Not freedom, but bread, material things, satisfaction, the feeling that they're taken care of. Now this, too, is an ancient thought. There is an ancient Egyptian text called the Instruction of Annie. And that's a name, not really just a quantifier, anybody. But the idea is, it's a story about a father and a son. And it's an interesting development in Egyptian literature because there is an earlier genre of instructions where the father typically is giving the rules for life to his son. It doesn't always follow that format, but it usually does. And anyway, in this one, the son then actually talks back. So the father is giving his son advice about how to become virtuous. And he goes on a great length. Well, do this, do that, and so forth. There's an earlier Egyptian instruction that has one of my favorite moral rules. I call it the slacker imperative. It is do no more than is required. That father was not exactly preparing his son for success. But in any case, this one is different. The father is saying, look, you've got to work hard to do this, you've got to do that, and so on. And the son finally says, well, look, all your sayings are excellent, but doing them requires virtues. Doing them requires already having a lot of hard work, and a lot of dedication, a lot of thoughtfulness. And in short, this isn't really how to become virtuous. You're supposing that I already have all these virtues, and that I'm willing to work really hard, and that I'm willing to be serious about this, and I'm willing to delay gratification, and so forth. And so finally the son says, look, you, my father, you who are wise and strong of hand, the infant in his mother's arms, his wish is for what nurses him. Look, says he, when he finds his speech, he says, give me bread. In other words, the son says to the father, you're concerned to make me virtuous. I don't care about being virtuous. I just want bread. I just want to be taken care of. And so it is not a new thing here. It is an ancient human thing to think, wouldn't it be awesome to have somebody just have a sugar daddy or sugar mom or whatever who's just going to take care of me, right? Give me what I want. So I won't have to work for things. I won't have to decide. That other person will decide for me and take care of me. And that's what the son in this story is saying. Look, Dad, you're trying to turn me into a person like you. I don't want to be a person like you. I just want you to take care of me. And it's something similar that Jesus is facing in the desert. Now, basically, Ivan thinks that people are like the son, not the father in that story. In other words, that people don't really want to be taught how to become virtuous. They don't want to be taught how to get by on their own. They just want somebody to take care of them. They want somebody to protect them. They want to be like sheep, and they want to find a shepherd. Okay, and so this is an interpretation of Jesus as the good shepherd, but in the sense of taking care of the sheep, feeding them, so the sheep don't have to do anything. They don't have to decide. Basically, according to Ivan, people don't want to think, they don't want to decide, they don't want to choose, they don't want to take responsibility. In short, they don't want to grow up. Okay, they want somebody to take care of them like little children or like sheep. Well, let's move on to the second temptation. Satan says to Jesus in the wilderness, if you're the Son of God, throw yourself down from the top of the temple. It's written that the angels will save you. Jesus answered, it is also written, don't put the Lord your God to the test. And so he rejects this temptation. Now, what exactly is being offered to you? Immortality. Ah, okay, interesting. Yes. That's part of what's going on here. You might think, you say, well, Jesus, throw yourself off and the angels will catch you. So yes, it's sort of overcoming the ordinary constraints of life. That's part of what's being offered. Is there anything else? Yeah.
Proof that he is the Son of God, or proof that God exists.
Good. Proof that he's the Son of God. Proof that God exists. And so you want everybody to bow down before you. First thing you can do is give them bread. But second thing you can do is demonstrate that you're the Son of God. Stop remaining hidden, in other words. What are you doing hiding out in the desert? Show people. Go to Jerusalem, to the top of the temple. Assemble a crowd. Say, I am the Lord your God. Jump up and have the angels swoop down and say, look, better than Penn and Teller, better than David Copperfield, better than all that. People are going to say, whoa, that guy must be the Son of God. Okay? So, what do you get? You get this universe of public recognition. You are who you say you are. Why not? Okay, you want public acclaim. You want to be acclaimed a great leader. That's how to do it. Everyone will know you're a divine being. Well, the Grand Inquisitor is basically saying, Jesus, you expected too much. You wanted love given free. But he says, look, yeah, you didn't want just admiration from some slaves or some sheep who were impressed by some truth. The shepherd gets up there and the sheep maybe are grumbling, and the shepherd impresses them with something sheep couldn't do. Now, actually, I don't think it's very hard to impress sheep, but you might think, look, you want to become a leader, impress people with something they can't do themselves. And so that will make you a leader of men, leader of women, somebody who can command the sheep. Why don't you do that? He says, look, you wanted the sheep not to follow you because they were impressed by some trick. You wanted them to give their allegiance freely. He said that was too much, too hard. Too few people are going to be able to do it. So he says, people are slaves. You think much too highly of them. At the end, they just want to be told what to do. They don't want to act freely. They don't want to love you freely. They don't want to do anything else freely. You'll be kinder to them if you have less respect for them. Now that's why I characterize Dostoevsky's philosophy as a philosophy of respect. Because he sees that as a fundamental question. Do you have respect for people? And do you trust them to judge? Maybe correctly, maybe incorrectly, but nevertheless, do you leave it up to them to judge? Or do you want to substitute your own judgment? Are you willing to hope that people love you freely, or do you want to in some way coerce them, force them into loving you, trick them into loving you? Now, the third temptation. Satan offers all the kingdoms of the world in their splendor. And Jesus responds by saying, away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. So here, Satan is offering him all worldly power, not just the satisfaction of his own wants, not just recognition and fame as a great leader, but now really command of the entire world. He says, look, you're the Son of God. You can take over the entire world. You can be the, gosh, what? Yeah, the universal king. Yeah, I mean, you can be the person who is the leader of the entire thing, right? The leading figure of the universe. And Jesus says, no, away from me. Now, here is how the Grand Inquisitor puts it. Had you taken the world in Caesar's purple, thou wouldst have founded the universal state and given universal peace. For who can rule men if not he who holds their conscience and their bread in his hands? So first of all, you could have given the people what they wanted. You could have had bread for yourself. You could have given the people bread. You could have been recognized as the Son of God, and so had the people follow you. And then you could have actually ruled the whole world. And you could have done it right. You could have brought about universal peace. So you could have brought about peace. You could have brought about happiness. You could have given people everything they want. You could have led the world in just the right way. Why didn't you do it? And so this challenge is in a way important because it's not, notice, just a selfish challenge. The first and the second, you could argue, are in part just appeals to Jesus trying to satisfy his own selfish desires. Hey, wouldn't you like some bread? Wouldn't you like to be recognized as who you are? This one is different. This one is, for the sake of the world, why didn't you take that earthly power? Why didn't you do it? Now suppose you were the person being questioned by the Grand Inquisitor here, and you're offered worldly power of this kind. What would you say? Notice that in the Gospel account, Jesus doesn't actually come out with the same kind of response. At this point, he just tells Satan to get lost. He doesn't give him a biblical quote. He doesn't give him a reason. He just says, get out of here. How would you respond? Suppose somebody offered that to you and said, look, I will make you the ruler of the entire earth. I will somehow unify the peoples. I will make them all think of you as their leader. There will be one world government, and you will be the sole monarch in charge. What do you say, oh queen? Will you take the mantle of authority and do it? He says, I'll do it. Okay, some of you would do it. Yeah.
There's also a condition there that said, only you worship.
Ooh, good, a condition, if only you worship me, right? And Jesus says, well, get lost. It's something like me saying to you, I will give you all authority in this classroom, as long as you defer to me. It's like you will become the head student. You will get to reward grades to all the other students. You can set the rules for the entire class, as long as you obey me. Now that doesn't seem so attractive, does it? For one thing, yes.
It's selling your soul to the devil.
Well, precisely, it's selling your soul to the devil. And, I mean, in this case, right, if it's me, you might say, well, Bobak's a good guy, so I don't have anything to worry about. But the devil, that's a different story, right? Sell your soul to Bobak, well, I'm not evil, I'm just kind of incompetent and forgetful. but the devil, that's a different story. So good, that's an important part of it. It's like, wait a minute, this is not the world with no strings attached. But moreover, the Grand Inquisitor says, look, if you had taken over the world, then you could have made people happy. But don't worry, Jesus, you blew it. You gave the wrong answer, but luckily for you, the church has taken over that role. We've taken over the world, and we've taken over the job of making people happy. So we tell them what to do, we make them happy. We treat them like children. But that's what they want. okay? So, yes, the church treats everybody as, and you can see here, by the way, Dostoevsky, though he's a Christian, doesn't think much of the church. But he says, look, yeah, I mean, the church treats people like children, but that's what they want, so that's good. And you know what we do? He says, we're really nice to our children. We let them sin. It's like an indulgent parent who lets the kid get away with things. That's the way the church is. We let the people sin. We say bad, but then we tell them they're forgiven. And so we let them sin because we love them. Everything's going to be forgiven in the end. So people are happy to give up their freedom to follow us. We let them sin, we let them be happy, we make them happy, and so they're going to be like happy children. They can do what they want. If they get into trouble, we get them out of trouble. We forgive them. It's all good. Well now, that's the way the story seems to be going. But now the Grand Inquisitor says, well, yes, in this way we make everybody happy. Well, almost everybody. Not exactly. Those who rule over the people will be unhappy. He admits the people will be like happy sheep, but the sheep require shepherds. There will have to be people who lead the church who actually tell the people what to do and provide for them. And that's going to be a pain in the butt, basically. That's going to be hard. He says there will be thousands of millions of happy days, but 100,000 sufferers who have taken upon themselves the curse of the knowledge of good and evil. So, somebody's going to have to play the role of shepherd. Somebody's going to actually have to get for the people the things they want. Somebody will have to actually make choices for them, make decisions, take responsibility. Those people aren't going to really have it so good, though they'll be the leaders. But leadership means they won't get to be like happy children. They'll be in a different role. There's a different story. Now notice at the end, they have the curse of the knowledge of good and evil. That should remind you of something. Yeah, the story of Adam and Eve in the fall. They eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that's precisely what happens here. It's what constitutes the fall of man in the traditional account. Adam and Eve partake of the fruit of the tree. What tree? Well, the tree that God commanded they should not eat, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so their eyes are opened, they can recognize good from evil, but they also lose their status as happy children. And basically, Ivan is saying, so there will have to be this group of people, let's call them the anointed ones, these leaders, these shepherds, who are going to have to eat of the fruit, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They will have to make choices. They will have to take responsibility. They'll have the burden.
Sorry. Michael. Stop.
That was Satan calling. Will you take what's beyond board number 4? Okay, now. Yeah, so some are going to fall, knowing good and evil, but that's for the sake of the others, so that the others can remain in the garden. His idea is, look, if some of us eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, then yes, we will be fallen creatures, we will have to take responsibility, but at least we do it for the sake of the others. We will be there to make everyone else happy. The others can stay in the garden. They can remain happy children, they can follow the rules, they'll do what they're told, they get to stay a flock of sheep. But the leaders, they're going to fall, they're going to suffer, they'll have to take responsibility, but they'll do it for the sake of the rest. They'll do it for the sake of man. Now, there's a paradox that arises here. It's based partly on the response to the time of the story here, partly the larger theme that Dostoevsky is portraying in the novel. Here's the difficulty with that. Do those who take this role on themselves, are they actually the ones who have the knowledge of good and evil? That is to say, are they to be trusted? Suppose I say, I'm going to offer you all the following deal. I will allow, 1/10 of the class, say, to become leaders. They will assign grades to all the rest. But that's okay. They will take on the hard decision-making responsibilities. They will tell you all how to write your papers and do all the rest. They will even take care of your exams for you. And you will get the grades they assign to you. How does that deal strike you? Would you want to be one of that controlling group? Would you want to be governed by that controlling group? No, right? Now, why not? Actually, there's something like this in the Stanford prison experiment. They set up in a psychology class a certain number of people who were called the guards, and a certain other group of people who were called the prisoners. and they put them in the basement of a psych building, and they were going to let this experiment run for a week. They had to stop it very quickly because the guards started tormenting the prisoners, even though there was no interesting distinction between them. They were all students in this one class. Those who were in a position of authority immediately began to abuse it. And it's a bit like that here. Now, I asked, I'm sort of getting something away here, maybe. What would be wrong with this? Why should people on neither side agree to this sort of rule?
We're self-interested, it's not their self-interest.
Good. People tend to be self-interested. And so it's not really in the self-interest of the sheep to give up all of their decision-making authority to someone else. It isn't really in the interest of those people who are the decision-makers to do it either. There is even a more serious problem Dostoevsky's pointing out. This vision that the anointed have cuts them off from the very norms they would need to make the decisions. I've been talking about this distinction between the manifest image, where we think of ourselves as free beings who think and who act on the basis of our thoughts, who choose and choose for reasons. But then a scientific image, which basically says we don't have free will. There may be some random processes, there may be deterministic laws, some mix of the two, but in any event, our actions are just controlled. Anything we happen to think is just a rationalization. The causes of our behavior are really the underlying molecules and what they're doing, according to scientific laws. Now, in a modern context, the anointed here tend to be not those who have noble birth or something else. They're the ones who claim to know this underlying picture, this hidden picture, the underlying causes that control things. But what is not there at the level of the scientific image? The ought, the reasons, the norms, right? In other words, they think, look, I've got the key. Here's why I deserve to be a leader. Here's why I deserve to be one of the anointed. It's because I know the hidden level. I understand the causes. I recognize that there's another image, and that our ordinary way of thinking about things is actually not the full picture. However, once you immerse yourself in that, what do you find? There are no longer any norms to guide you. There's no longer any evaluation. There's no longer any up or down, right or wrong, good or bad, just or unjust, at that level. And so that's why Nietzsche says, now we're at sea. There's no longer any up or down, any east or west. Without God, without authority, without morality, all of a sudden, we don't know where to go. We're adrift at sea. And if we're going to sail in some particular direction or other, it's totally up to us now. But here the point is, look, if you think you deserve to lead precisely because you understand this depth level, then the very things you need to lead, the norms, the values, the moral judgments, are the things you don't have at that level. And so what is going to guide the decisions of these leaders, these shepherds? Actually, the sheep are the only one with the norms who are capable of helping guide things. So in other words, the sheep have these ideas, these common sense ideas of what's right and wrong, good and bad, better and worse. And the anointed don't have them anymore. Yeah.
So is that somewhat like Kierkegaard's paradox of faith, where like this person's mind is like big yourself above the universe, but it does see yourself to it? Is it kind of like that?
Good, yeah, she's asking, is this kind of like Kierkegaard's paradox of faith? It is a lot like that, but to really explain it will take me all of the rest of the 5 minutes I have, so much to do it. But yes, this is, Dostoevsky and Kierkegaard are actually contemporaries, and yes, I think there's a very similar theme going on here. Faith for Kierkegaard does involve this sort of leap into the infinite that has no rational justification. And here, you might say the various people who think they have a justification for leading are the people least equipped to lead. It's sort of like those who are the most willing to shout from the rooftops that they have faith, are the least trustworthy ones when it comes to questions of faith. Yeah?
Work together, sheep and
Oh, say it again.
and they work together, the sheep and the
Can they work together, the sheep and the shepherds? Maybe. And so we might say, look, maybe the anointed, the shepherds here, those who pride themselves on having the knowledge of good and evil, they're the ones actually who most lack the knowledge of good and evil. They're the least equipped to make decisions. They're the least equipped to guide others. But maybe they can be made to work together with the sheep. Here's one way of viewing what democracy is all about. It's to make the shepherds listen to the sheep. Okay? And maybe that's a solution to this problem. Now, in 19th century Russia, there was nothing approximating democracy. The young Dostoevsky wanted to move it in that direction. And you can see democracy as one way of trying to solve this problem. Say, all right, let's have shepherds, but let's let the sheep choose the shepherds, and let's make sure the shepherds are accountable to the sheep. Okay, that's one way of solving, you might say, the political problem that this poses. So the sheep at least have the norms. In one way, Dostoevsky say, well, who do you most trust to actually decide what's right and wrong, what's good and bad? Is it a bunch of philosophy professors, or is it just common people? At one point, William F. Buckley said, I'd rather be ruled by the first 500 people in the Boston phone book than by the Harvard faculty. In effect, he's saying, look, I trust the sheep not to jump off the cliff. I don't trust the people who are the self-declared shepherds. And in a sense, that's the issue Dostoevsky's raising. Some people are going to say, I know what to do, I'll be a leader. And are those the people you want to lead you? Maybe those are the people you should least trust to lead you. So, well, yes, I'll go on and on about this if I'm allowed to, but I will stop and say, here's the problem. Dostoevsky saying, in order to actually make decent decisions, in order to lead people, but even to lead yourself, you've got to be anchored to something that gives your life meaning, to which you are accountable. You've got to find some anchor outside yourself. You've got to seek either an earthly kingdom or a heavenly kingdom. If you're wrapped up entirely in yourself, then really you're just like a baby who's clamoring for me. He says that's no way to live. You've got to be anchored to something outside yourself if you're to lead anything approaching a mature human life. But then either you're going to be anchored to something that is earthly, something that is secular, something that's worldly, or you're going to try to seek an anchor that is outside all of that. Well, he says, in the end, you've got to think of yourself as defining values. That's Nietzsche's option. That's what Nietzsche says we've all got to do in the end. Or you've got to see something else as setting values for you. And that something else might be something in the world. It might be something else in the world. Now, socialism, from this point of view, is the question of the Tower of Babel. Built without God, not to mount to heaven from earth, but to set up heaven on earth. The idea is really to try to establish a heavenly kingdom here. And is it possible? Well, in the end, Dostoevsky really suggests there are two possible attitudes. Really three, I suppose, if you just remain within the cycle. There is the purely selfish person. There is socialism, which says the good of humanity, the good of mankind ought to be the aim. Or there is religion, there is God. And in the end, he says those are the only choices. Now, why? Because it's a question of what you put at the center of your universe. It's either you, or it's something in the world outside of you, and the only thing that makes any sense there is humanity as a whole. Or it is something outside of the world itself, God. And so, in the end, he thinks that intermediate choice, humanity, collapses. Either it pushes you toward God, or it pushes you back inside yourself. And so really, in the end, he says, the choice is you or God. Okay? It's either the universe is about you, or you think it's about something higher than you, and there is no other way out. Well, why? What's wrong with that idea of putting mankind at the center? In the end, he says, because that is to say it's humanity that deserves the ultimate respect. But if you're one of the anointed, if you're one of the people who tries to be the leader, the shepherd, that's based on the idea that you know better than the sheep. And that shows a basic disrespect for the sheep. So there's a kind of contradiction in that attitude. You are disrespecting the people you're trying to lead. At the same time, you're saying, no, they're the ultimate value, but they're idiots. Okay, to put it in a nutshell, that's what you have to think. You have to think, I know better than those innocent sheep, but on the other hand, those sheep are all that matters. And he says, in the end, that's an incoherent attitude. You've either got to worship yourself, or you've got to worship God. There isn't any other way. And so he says, apart from religion, people naturally end up being narcissists. In the end, it becomes a matter of taking value only from themselves. Now, if you're Nietzsche, you say, yay, that's what we all have to do. If you're Dostoevsky, you say, that's a disaster. That's a retreat to the cradle. Grow up. Next time, we'll look at a variety of different responses to the same basic dilemma.